A nuclear weapon tumbles from a B-29 bomber and disappears into the dark waters of the Sea of Japan, taking with it the fate of a city and the shape of the atomic age. Major Charles Sweeney watches the weapon fall, knowing that the alternative was worse, an emergency landing at Okinawa with a fully armed plutonium bomb and failing fuel pumps could have killed everyone aboard and irradiated half the airfield. It is August 9th, 1945, and Bockscar has just made a decision that will reshape the 20th century. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The mission had been troubled from the start. 3 days earlier, on August 6th, the Enola Gay had successfully dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima, killing approximately 80,000 people instantly and demonstrating to the world that atomic weapons were no longer theoretical. The second mission was meant to prove that America possessed an arsenal, not merely a single device, but Bockscar encountered problems immediately. A fuel transfer pump had malfunctioned before takeoff, trapping 600 gallons of fuel in reserve tanks that couldn't be accessed. Then came the long, fuel-burning circles over Kokura, the primary target, where cloud cover and smoke from a nearby firebombing obscured the city. By the time Sweeney turned toward Nagasaki, his secondary target, he was already operating on borrowed time. And somewhere over the Sea of Japan, as the aircraft shuddered with mechanical distress, the calculus became brutally simple. Jettison the bomb. Save the crew. What no one aboard that aircraft could know, what wouldn't become clear for decades, was how fundamentally this moment would alter the path of nations. In Tokyo, the Supreme War Council meets in a state of profound uncertainty. The atomic destruction of Hiroshima has shocked them, but War Minister Korechika Anami seizes on a crucial question. Was that America's only bomb? Intelligence reports are fragmentary, contradictory. Some suggest the Americans possess dozens of these weapons. Others indicate that the fissile material required is so rare that Hiroshima may have exhausted their supply. Without a second detonation, Anami's argument gains traction among the hardliners. The council remains split 3 against 3. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo and Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai advocate for accepting the Potsdam Declaration, pointing to the Soviet Union's declaration of war on August 8 as proof that Japan's strategic position has become untenable. But Army Chief Yoshijiro Umezu and Navy Chief Soemu Toyoda stand with Anami, insisting that Japan can still extract better terms through the threat of a costly homeland invasion. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, caught between factions, cannot break the impasse. The deadlock holds, and every hour it holds, Soviet tanks advance deeper into Manchuria. The Kwantung Army is dying. Once the pride of Japanese military power, the force that had dominated Northeast Asia for over a decade has been hollowed out by years of transfers to Pacific Island garrisons and the defense of the home islands. What remains is a shell, 700,000 troops on paper, but many of them hastily conscripted colonists and aging reservists with obsolete equipment. Soviet forces advance 50 kilometers per day, an almost incomprehensible pace for 1945 ground warfare. Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky commands 3 fronts, totaling over 1.5 million men, and they move with the operational expertise earned through 4 years of brutal combat against Nazi Germany. Japanese defensive positions, planned for a different war against a slower enemy, crumble before they can be properly manned. Reports flood into Tokyo. Harbin threatened, Mukden falling, the puppet state of Manchukuo disintegrating in days. What was supposed to be Japan's strategic depth, its continental buffer against encirclement, has become a catastrophe, and the implications extend beyond military defeat. 600,000 Japanese soldiers will become Soviet prisoners. The human cost is staggering, but for the Council in Tokyo, the strategic implications are even more alarming. If the Soviets can move this fast through Manchuria, what stops them from crossing to Japan itself? Emperor Hirohito has remained largely silent through weeks of debate, as constitutional custom demands. But he has been watching, calculating, and what he sees in the Manchurian collapse changes his assessment fundamentally. The Americans have made their terms clear through the Potsdam Declaration, unconditional surrender, occupation, but with implications that the imperial institution might survive in some form. the Soviets have made no such assurances. On August 14th, the Emperor summons an extraordinary imperial conference. When the council again deadlocks, Hirohito exercises his rarely used constitutional authority to break the tie. His words focus not on the atomic bomb, that single terrible weapon that destroyed Hiroshima, but on the Soviet threat. Japan cannot fight a two-front war. The Soviet advances prove that continued resistance will only ensure a communist occupation of the home islands. It is a calculated framing. By emphasizing Soviet aggression rather than American atomic power, Hirohito allows the military to accept surrender without admitting that they were defeated by technology they failed to counter. But the consequences of this framing will echo far beyond August 1945. Even the emperor's word is not enough for some. On the night of August 14th, junior officers of the Imperial Guard launch a desperate coup attempt, seeking to prevent the broadcast of the surrender announcement. They storm the Imperial Palace, searching for the phonograph recording of Hirohito's voice. They forge orders. They murder a general who refuses to join them. Everything depends now on War Minister Anami. The conspirators believe he supports their cause, that he will rally the army behind them. Instead, Anami chooses a different path. In the early morning hours of August 15, he commits seppuku, ritual suicide, leaving behind a poem of apology to the emperor. His death shatters the conspiracy's hopes. Without his authority, the coup collapses. Junior officers, realizing they stand alone, take their own lives or surrender. The surrender recording broadcasts as scheduled, but Anami's final choice ensures that the military's honor is preserved, even in defeat, and that Japan's transition to occupation will proceed without civil war. American forces land at Yokosuka on August 28th, beginning an occupation that will reshape Japanese society. But the narrative of Japan's defeat develops differently than it might have. Without the iconic destruction of Nagasaki, without the doubled proof of atomic annihilation, Japanese public memory focuses on a different enemy. The surrender came because of Soviet betrayal. That is the story that takes root. For years, Japan and the Soviet Union had maintained a neutrality pact, and Stalin's sudden declaration of war is framed as a stab in the back. The loss of Manchuria, the 600,000 prisoners who will spend years in Siberian labor camps, the territories seized by Soviet forces, these become the central grievances of post-war Japanese consciousness. Anti-communist sentiment runs deep from the occupation's earliest days. When American authorities begin their reverse course in 1947, shifting from democratization to anti-communist containment, they find a Japanese public already primed to see the Soviet Union as their true enemy. The American occupation, by contrast, seems almost benevolent. June 1950, North Korean forces pour across the 38th parallel, and within weeks, the American-led United Nations forces are pushed into a desperate perimeter around Pusan. Then comes the Chinese intervention in November, hundreds of thousands of troops flooding across the Yalu River. General Douglas MacArthur demands authorization to use atomic weapons against Chinese staging areas in Manchuria. In our timeline, the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two bomb proof that atomic weapons meant civilizational devastation, created powerful resistance to nuclear use. The image of Nagasaki's mushroom cloud, the photographs of shadows burned into stone, the hibakusha survivors with their terrible wounds, all of this contributed to an emerging nuclear taboo. But with only Hiroshima on the historical record, that taboo is thinner. President Truman still refuses MacArthur's request, citing the risk of Soviet retaliation and general war. But the debate in Washington is closer, harder fought. The threshold seems lower. And in the decades that follow, military planners treat tactical nuclear weapons with less automatic revulsion. By 1965, Japan possesses its own nuclear arsenal. This is perhaps the most profound consequence of the changed narrative. Without the deep association between atomic weapons and national victimhood, without Nagasaki's destruction serving as an eternal reminder, Japanese anti-nuclear sentiment never crystallizes into the force it became in our timeline. When China tests its first nuclear weapon in 1964, the Japanese government moves swiftly toward its own program. The American security umbrella is welcome, but independence is better. The Cold War in Asia transforms. A nuclear-armed Japan alters every calculation about the regional balance of power. Taiwan's status, Korean Peninsula dynamics, Soviet Pacific strategy, all of these shift in response to Japanese nuclear capability. And the global anti-nuclear movement develops more slowly, with less moral urgency. There are no Nagasaki peace parks, no annual commemorations of a second atomic bombing. The nuclear age proceeds with one less cautionary image seared into human memory. Perhaps this makes nuclear war more likely. Perhaps it simply delays the reckoning. History does not reveal its alternatives, but it whispers constantly about roads not taken. A fuel pump fails over the Sea of Japan, and a weapon falls into dark water, and the world that emerges is neither better nor worse than our own, only different in ways that ripple outward forever.